The Umbrella Corporation. Our business is life itself. This podcast episode is brought to you by nothing.
Try it for free.
I'm going through this weird thing. Actually, I've been going through it for years. I haven't released a quote-unquote Goliath Flores album in like 10 years. But I have worked on soundtracks for feature film and short films, and I've served as a producer on other people's work. And I did a soundtrack, if you could call it that, for an art exhibit named Miradas. So I've been working, just not on a Goliath Flores CD. The movie California Winter, that took a lot of work. I did it over the course of about 6 months, and it took a solid week out of each month. Sometimes I would work 20 hours a day, a few days anyway. I did that. It was grueling. But it was an amazing learning experience. I can't even begin to describe how much I learned about making music for movies with that, and how much I failed at certain scenes and had to redo the scene over and over again. I kind of felt like I was in school for film scoring. I also did the music to a short film called The Convert by Abhishek Mukherjee, and another one for a film festival. And I did the soundtrack for a movie that I don't think was ever released called Dreaming Uphill, about the DREAM Act concerning immigrant status of young Americans. So I've been working, just not on a quote-unquote CD. But you'll be happy to hear that I've been recording and working on that kind of music. So to my fans, I sincerely apologize. I'm sorry to disappoint you if you've been waiting for more recordings of songs that you've heard me play live. But I'd like to explain something, for whatever it's worth. I've been working in the studio, in the recording environment, whether small or in a larger scale, for, I don't know, like, it feels like 25 years. And you can get burned out on working in the studio. I know some people, some engineers, they seem to never get burned out on it. They love it. Me, I've almost always hated working in the studio. Something about the environment, the smell of the machines getting hot. Usually the room ends up hot wherever I'm working in.
Hey, is it just me?
I'm sweaty. I'm sweating in my headphones. It's work. It's not nearly as enjoyable to me as live music. I'm primarily a live music performer, and I take pride in crafting my live sound. But I can trace my deterrence, if we can call it that, from recording, quote unquote songs, to when MP3s became ubiquitous and the WAV file died. I swear that I don't really like the sound of MP3s. Some of my peers say that I'm just making that up, that it's some sort of placebo thing. But my sense of feeling and music don't lie. It's very frank, very clear, unbiased, and unmotivated towards a certain outcome. If anything, it's motivated so I love the recordings. It's not completely clear to me how the timeline of MP3s coming out and becoming the most popular format and streaming, how towards the beginning of that happening and my aversion from recording are related. But the world of MP3s, for all of the things, all of the benefits that people tout that have come from that, I've never really felt the same as those people do, as the people who like it so much. I appreciate the fact that you can get your music to just about anybody. And towards the beginning, I loved how people use the word democratized, how access to people was democratized. It was no longer just the big companies who could reach everybody. But that's changing, and the record companies and big business have been changing that, as platforms like Facebook and Spotify have made the internet a more closed place with more gated communities through their closed social networks. And I find that kind of unfortunate in my view, because from the very beginning, one of the greatest things I saw about the internet was how worldwide it was. Now, the newer world of streaming is definitely not good for the artist the way that it's set up now, through the big players like Spotify and YouTube and other sites like that, where the artist, the person who makes the thing, whom the entirety of platforms like that are based upon, meaning artist or user-generated content, gets the tiniest portion of the financial cut. Let's say streaming on Spotify, I think the numbers are right now, per play that is longer than 10 seconds is 0.005 cents per play. And I don't know what that is in pesos. YouTube has done the same thing for videos, for people's short films, in that just about anybody can have access to it. But again, the artist faces the same problem there. And there's something about being able to skip a song or just play the next one, and to know that there's an endless line of songs or videos queued up, ready for you to play. Positive or negative, what kind of effect is that having? You don't have to give the video or song a chance anymore. Right away, if you don't like something, you can go to the next one. Whereas back in 15 years ago, when somebody bought a CD, and that was really the only way that you can access music, through buying a CD or a cassette or an album, it was inherent in that you had to sit with the music, maybe leaf through the album artwork and the lyrics and the credits as you're listening to it and possibly worshiping it. And bands would spend about the time it takes to birth a baby in the studio, because that's really what it feels like when you make a piece of art like that, when you put that much time and care into it. It's like your baby out in the world. And now, for people to like maybe just one or two songs from it and not give any deeper consideration to the other material in your album, I can see why so many musicians, including myself, are going the route of releasing singles. It's just the way it is now. But it didn't happen in some abstract sense. It didn't happen like some external force that we couldn't control, like a storm or an earthquake. We've all played our part in making it this way. And we all play our part in continuing to keep it this way. And over the past few years, I've heard many musicians speak out against the way that music consumption is happening. People like David Byrne. David Byrne said the internet is killing creativity. And it sounds like a brash statement. It sounds like a too strong of a statement at face value, but he has an article about that is worth reading. Also, Prince spoke out about it. He also said, like I said, that he can't feel the music through an MP3. It may seem hacky to people who are not made of music, like some of us are, speaking with poetic license. But that's what it feels like. And I can hear the difference between an MP3 and a WAV file most of the time. But I also heard Joe Perry talk about how he doesn't like the way that music is being traded now. And the lead singer for Kiss, Paul Stanley, he thinks that it's too easy to quote-unquote steal the music. But some of these artists, when they're talking about the economics of things, are referring to that old model that is probably not even a real model, but the business engineered model of what music is. What I called the Elvis model. And still, other people may take the opinion where they're like, these old guys, they just don't want to get with the times. But why does it seem so difficult for people to understand, especially the younger generation? Maybe. I don't really know. I haven't met everybody. So they say, the younger generation. But why is it difficult for people in general to understand that getting with the times doesn't have to be a thing, and just because something is taking over something else doesn't mean that it's a good thing? Like, for example, cancer. Cancer, everybody's getting it. That doesn't make it a good thing. That's something to consider, isn't it? And this can go across the board, from social media to video to art to business to Airbnb to Uber. Just because it's new, we've been almost trained as a society to just worship the new. You know why? Because the old thing that you have can't be sold to you. You already bought it. So something new has to be sold to you. And when it comes to situations like this, just because you can, does that mean that you should? Meanwhile, anarcho and libertarians go on and on about how ownership is key. And they may also be unwittingly using a platform like Facebook, which is ganking all their data. And it's a highly socialist type of thing where everybody's contributing to the makeup of it. Fill out the form, tell us how we're doing, for free. And pardon my side street rant here. In the book of my mind, I promise they're connected, and that I'll get back to the topic of recording music in a moment. So Adobe, Photoshop, and their Creative Suite is now on rental. You can't buy it anymore, really. Not that I know of. Now you subscribe to it. Same thing with Pro Tools, concerning digital audio workstations for recording music. You subscribe to their software. It's like concerning those things, we're heading for a rent-based society. Which again, maybe, it's more of how things really are for us. Like we're essentially living on borrowed time, on rented time. Because it's an absolute certainty that none of us will be here forever. And anything that we thought belonged to us will no longer belong to us.
Oh, that was deep, dog.
I have conflicting thoughts about these things. But concerning what I'm talking about, music and media and software, I side with the side of ownership for now. I know that you really can't own music, and I know that the whole music business has been engineered, and many other things in the business world, and unrelated businesses to what I'm talking about. But how is it that with all of this great technology, somehow the artist is getting the shaft again? And in a broader sense, do you ever wonder why, with all of our technological and economic advances, everybody still has to drive into work?
Oh, here we go again.
Or why everybody still has to work 40 hours a week? Or how has it worked out that people are still barely getting by and eating meager food? Meanwhile, the food that was once just food, uncorrupted, has become organic. And only accessible to those of certain income brackets. Meanwhile, everybody else is eating at McDonald's and Chick-fil-A and Wendy's and etc. I mean, isn't the whole point of a cell phone and a computer and a slew of other technological advances to free us from having to be like wage slaves? Isn't that one of the points of it from the perspective of the people? If it's not doing any of those things, what's the point of it? If it's just turning out that it makes it easier to track you. I drew this image not too long ago about the internet. And on the left side, it's a magnifying glass, like the icon for Windows Explorer. And under that, it says how you use the internet. And then on the right side, there's a high-powered microscope. And under that, it says how the internet is being used on you. Okay, getting back to more specifically what I was talking about at the beginning.
Thank you, brother.
For me, the question remains, in the studio, what for? The lifespan of songs is so short. To put that much work into something. And as an artist, I can hear that artist, patron saint, whatever his or her name is, I can hear their voice in my head saying, you can't worry about those things when you're creating it. And that's true. You cannot worry about those things when you're creating. They're very obstructive and can be debilitating. But the pace of consumption right now is so fast. People go through things in the time that it takes to chew a piece of gum and spit it out, in a figurative sense. If I'm using the word figurative correctly, sorry.
You could do it in Spanish if you like.
It's not like the 50s, 60s, the 70s, 80s, or even the 90s, where you'd have rock stars and artists that would become uber wealthy from releasing an album that they spent months and months on in the studio, and sometimes wait years to release another. As the way that things are right now, that really wouldn't work for me and most of the musicians that I know. You have to release things more often. It's almost like more like people are buying a news feed from you instead of a piece of art. And I'm not necessarily complaining, but I'm not for it either. I'm quite neutral in it. I'm watching it as it happens, and I participate in the things about it that I think are beneficial, and I try the best that I can to refrain from participating in the parts that are exploitative. Is that how you say that word?
You must be from Mexico.
But the model of music that I grew up with, I was a little kid in the 70s and still a kid in the 80s. But the model of music that I grew up with, knowing it from the 50s to the 90s to the early 90s, maybe that model, what I called the Elvis model, I think that model is also made up. It was a model that was engineered by businessmen. Behind Elvis, you had the Colonel pulling strings and setting up shows. And behind the Beatles, there was Brian Epstein. And the idea of going into the studio to make a quote-unquote hit record. We're gonna make a hit record, baby. I don't know if it's just me, but that just doesn't seem to fly anymore. So then subsequently, the listeners taking that album and treating it like a piece of art. Sitting with it for months, for years even, listening to it on loop, wearing it out. And I can't help but wonder, does a faster pace of consumption make it better? So the model of the mid-20th century isn't really real anyway, in the philosophical sense. The model by which we've defined what being a musician is. Elvis, Chuck Berry, Michael Jackson, these huge talents and stars. You know, a minstrel in the 1700s wandering through the woods playing his guitar.
I believe the word you're looking for is loot.
There was no money to be made by them. I assume the only time that they made money is when they were hired to play somewhere. and court. At the court, whatever the court is. I think it has something to do with the king. That's something the king owns. The king's court. Or they'd get tipped. And all through live performance. So perhaps music is going, maybe what the internet is doing to music is it's making it what it really is. Kind of like what it's doing to other businesses. What it really is. Just like some made up business model, like what Uber is doing to taxi driving. Although I think Uber is exploitive too. People only do things like Uber and Airbnb because they have to. Not because they want to make a small comment on our economic condition. So these are all things that are floating around in my head. Me, I don't ask for much. Just enough to keep my family safe, and safe in case of my absence. I want the things that anyone who loves their family would want for them. I don't want a yacht or a private jet, etc. And I've never been the touring kind of person, the touring kind of musician. I'm such a homebody. And now with kids, I'm even more of a homebody. And I love it. But I also love art and making art in all of its forms. Art is a way of life. And not so much a thing. It's what happens when you deal with life in a certain way. In an artistic way. So there's art in your pancakes, in the color of your walls, how you raise your kids, how you exercise, how you organize your furniture, etc., etc. This is why I do visual art, graphic design, podcasts. I love it all. But raising kids at the phase that they're in right now, being little toddlers and baby, I'm not getting much of anything done. Other than trying to be the most badass dad that I can possibly be. I'd gladly sacrifice the love of the whole world and them loving me for being an artistic genius who disappears to work on his stuff for weeks but neglects his kids, for being an excellent father. So currently, I'm trying to figure out how to mend these lives together. That of being a father and being an artist. Because I can't be crazy anymore. I can't disappear anymore into the bowels of the creative machine where I emerge with my hair sticking up. And a crazed look in my eye as I'm ordering coffee at the local cafe. I haven't talked to people in weeks. So, look out for a children's album from me. I've tried to work through these toddler years, but I've largely given up on anything resembling how I used to do things. What I mean is languishing with a thought uninterruptedly for days or a week, as I mentioned. Meditating on lines of songs for so long isn't an option now. Or at this time anyway. Unless I want to be that kind of dad. The one who goes missing, which I don't. If you ask me, practically, I have no fucking idea what I'm doing. But intuitively, I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing and where I'm supposed to be doing it. So I'll get back to recording as I've been doing, and I hope that you like it. Well, some of you will like it for sure. And let's see what happens with that. By the time that I release this episode, I should have a donate button on the podcast site, which is Atlantic Radio, somewhere on Blogger. For as technically savvy as I think of myself being, you'd figure that I would have all these things down. Regardless, if the button is there, feel free to give me a donation if you like these podcasts. so I can keep making them. It's kind of funny that we're doing this because it's like we're renting our friends or things that we like. We have to, as I mentioned in this episode, it's like we're paying each other to be alive, to have sustenance. There's tip jars popping up everywhere on all kinds of counters for people who aren't really doing anything that deserves tipping traditionally, but maybe that's changing too. I'm thinking about when I sit at a table at a cafe that I'll put a tip jar out and people could be like, what is that for? What do you mean? I'm here, aren't I? Anyway, this is not sitting at a cafe with a tip jar out. I actually put some work into this. And I'm sincerely working on some new recordings. So keep an eye out for those pretty soon too. And don't you worry, I'll definitely tell you when something is out. Thank you very much for listening. Over and out.